Picture this. The year is 1990. You are 36 years old, and your first film, financed through crowdfunding and a more than generous loan from your parents, has just won the Grand Jury Prize at the Sundance Film Festival. Your film has been praised by critics and audiences alike, with special mention of your keen eye for a rich cinematic language. The praise for the film has been amazing and confidence building. Given the fact that previous recipients of the Grand Jury Prize went on to have major success in the industry, you're sure that this is what's going to happen for you. So you relocate from your hometown of Flint, Michigan to Los Angeles in the hopes of being closer to the opportunities that you're sure are arriving at your doorstep. The opportunities aren't really pouring in though, and your highly acclaimed film has yet to receive widespread distribution. You're not too worried. After all, you've just made a pretty major deal with Warner Brothers, who bought remake rights to your film for $250,000. No other deals yet, very few job offers, but after winning the biggest award at America's biggest independent film festival and having meetings with the likes of Steven Soderbergh and Jane Fonda, you're not worried. All of these are good signs, right? One day, you sit down with notable film critic Elvis Mitchell, who asks you about your movie, about what's next for you, all the usual stuff. But then he says, "I'm sorry about your film being suppressed." And you ask, "What do you mean?" And he says, "Well, what would you call Warner Brothers buying the remake rights to your film but not the distribution rights?" And you, well, Chameleon Street tells the story of real-life con man William Doug Street Jr. Not quite a biopic and not all fiction, the film is an ambitious take on the standard crime story, part feverish nightmare, part unrelenting reality, and part absurdist humor. With a rap sheet that dates back to 1969, Street successfully played the role of Jerry Levias, a wide receiver for the Houston Oilers, passed himself off as a powerful attorney and a skilled surgeon. Street's performance as a medical surgeon was the most unnerving of all his ruses. He actually assisted in a number of surgeries, including mastectomies, appendectomies, and hemorrhoid operations. Street reflected on his first successful scheme in 1985 and said, "That was the first time I found out how easy it was to get people to believe whatever you said, as long as you said it right." The newspaper where this quote was first published happened to be picked up by a young Wendell B. Harris. Harris read the stories of Street's impersonations, his glib way of recounting it all, and knew right away that this was the story he wanted to tell. This was going to be his first film, and he was going to get it made, no matter what. Harris went on to interview William Doug Street while the latter was serving up a jail sentence. The interviews were extensive, with Harris making consistent visits to the penitentiary for at least 3 years. And the time the two got to know each other, the script expanded and shrunk and boiled over and was refined until it became the film that it is today. After 4 years of trying to scrape a budget together, the majority of which was contributed by Harris's parents and brother, filming began in 1987. To describe just how unconventional Chameleon Street can be in its approach to Doug Street's story is challenging. On one hand, it delivers the information of Street's escapades in a matter-of-fact way, presenting scheme after jail stint. On the other hand, the story being completely unconcerned with penning down a motive or delving into how Street's actions affected his victims was radical for the time it was created in. So much so that a lot of early critiques of the film cited its lack of explanation as a weak spot. But Harris didn't want to focus on the narratives of the victims, and he didn't really see the point of trying to dissect why Street was so inclined to live a life of stolen personas. He wanted to present an accurate portrait not just about Doug Street, the criminal, but how Doug Street sees himself. Leaving out the victims is an extension of Street's own point of view and the complete disregard he has for anyone affected by his crimes. The film's kaleidoscopic storytelling, dark humor, and pockets of surrealism aren't easy to define by genre. It's a biopic, it's a psychological thriller, it's a family drama, it's a fever dream. The melting and melding of genres is not only an exercise in creative freedom, but it's a reflection of the very thing Chameleon Street has come to represent. The movie starts with a scene in a doctor's office. Street sits with his back to the camera as a doctor asks him questions about his plans. Is the scheming and scamming going to continue? Is he going to be a helpful member of society or a nuisance? Later in the movie, we'll come back to this scene, but for now, as a first introduction to the character, Doug's face is hidden. When we do see his face in a couple of shots, it's a moment that exists in the void of his own mind. He's swallowed in darkness as distorted voices echo around him. The voice of writer, director, and star Harris is disembodied as he coldly recites a poem.
I think, therefore I scan. I think the air is sweet. I know not what I am. I am Chameleon Street.
From there, Harris takes us back to the year 1978, when Street's impersonations first began. We see his mundane life as he works at his father's business installing burglar alarms, but his job is less exciting than that. He gets to wait in the van while the real work gets done. Recently remarried and living in his parents' basement, Street laments his financial woes with his friends where they come up with a scheme. They decide to blackmail baseball player Willie Horton by sending a letter to his wife alleging evidence of adultery that will be released to the public unless $50,000 is exchanged for the non-existent photos. The scheme doesn't work out at all, but it gives Street a taste for what could be. He realizes that access to a more fulfilling, more exciting life isn't as far away as he thought it was. That if he wanted to be a baseball player, or a doctor, or an attorney, he could talk his way into it. As Street tries on different lives to varying degrees of success, his life changes its skin at the same frequency, bouncing around from state to state, separating from his second wife, reuniting with an old flame, and then finding his wife again. All the while, the drastic jumps in time and place reveal cracks in our unreliable narrator's story. Nothing is real, and everything is real, and it leaves you on unsteady ground. The real Doug Street would lie so routinely he often believed his own tall tales. In the aforementioned article published in 1985, Street briefly mentions how many times he came close to death while serving in the Vietnam War. I think I had a death wish when I went to Vietnam. I had a feeling, even back then, that I wasn't going to accomplish anything. I thought maybe I'd accomplish something in dying for my country. I came close, too. Almost got myself killed a couple of times. Not true, says his mother. Street shows himself to be prideful, chauvinistic, and small-minded. Everyone in his life is either out to get him or they're merely a pawn in his game. The best example is how he talks about his second wife, Gabrielle. In the beginning of the movie, he can't stop talking about how great she is. So much better than his first wife, so much smarter, so much kinder. But his perspective of Gabrielle constantly distorts. Sometimes he sees her only as a money-grabbing succubus, and other times as an ignorant waste of space. But he always sees her as less than himself, and that goes for everyone he comes across. The film wouldn't work if it concerned itself too much with the humanity of other people. By treating everyone else like playthings in the scheme of the script, we become the chameleon. People are expendable, relationships are disposable, and what really matters is Doug, and Doug alone, because it's his head we're in after all. Chris Hicks wrote a review for the film in 1991 where he denounced the writing for the main character. Harris has a commanding screen presence and a great voice, but he's too often smug and condescending, making no bones about how Street views the people who accept his fakery. The smug condescension of our protagonist, however, is telling us how he perceives the people who buy what he's selling. It tells us how he views everyone. The emptiness of Doug Street's character, how he doesn't really know himself, which is why he seeks out different people to be, is visually depicted in a couple of ways. For example, the first scene in the movie where our introduction to Doug is the back of his head, face obscured. What matters in this scene is the doctor, because that's who Doug is focusing on. That's who he's mirroring and trying to satisfy. I'm especially fond of the moment where Doug and his friends embark on their first scheme. As his friends discuss the possibility of scamming Willie Horton out of $50,000, Doug's face is shrouded in darkness. It isn't until the very end of the scene, when Doug leans forward in his chair to pen the note they'll use for blackmailing, that his face is revealed. In the act of pretending, he has sight of himself, even if that version of him is just a ruse. Man, I love that. It's understandable that Chameleon Street was hard to pin down, but its greatness and cinematic achievement is obvious. The unconventional storytelling, the entrenchment in Doug Street's point of view, the sardonic flourish with which it was written, all of it results in a well-made, boundary-testing movie that should have gone on to be the first of many for Wendell B. Harris Jr. Unfortunately, as you may have guessed from the intro, that's not how it went down. In 1989, Sundance gave the Audience Award for Drama to Steven Soderbergh's trailblazing debut feature, Sex, Lies, and Videotape, a movie that skyrocketed his name into the public consciousness and made him a much talked about figure in directing. After Wendell B. Harris screened Chameleon Street at Sundance and took a moment for Q&A, there was one young man in the crowd who asked Harris these penetrative, insightful questions that no one else was asking. This young man really seemed to enjoy the film, and it turned out this was Steven Soderbergh, who, having become a member of the Sundance Committee, voted for Chameleon Street to win the Grand Jury Prize in 1990. With the prize in his pocket and a highly regarded filmmaker like Soderbergh in his corner, Harris expected it wouldn't take long at all for a studio to pick his film up for distribution. He was excited to have the movie seen by more people, but what excited him more was being able to finally pay his family back for their investment in the project, for their belief in him. Prior to 1990, plenty of films had won the Grand Jury Prize or Audience Award and quietly came and went with little fanfare. But most of those movies managed to get distribution by companies small and large, even if the release was limited to 30 or so theaters. It wasn't just that Chameleon Street won the Grand Jury Prize either, it was that the movie was being talked about. It was that Wendell B. Harris was having meeting after meeting with actors, producers, and the heads of companies who showered him and the film with praise. With this kind of attention, with all of these meetings people wanted to have with him, it really did seem like a sure thing that the movie would be distributed. And it also seems like a very reasonable thing to assume. But not so. The only offer Harris got was the one from Warner Brothers when they offered $250,000 for the remake rights. You see, the movie was good, but it couldn't be released the way that it was, no. The reason, Harris was told, was that it would be hard to promote to black audiences, because it wasn't really a so-called black film. The biggest concern studios had was that black audiences just wouldn't get it. It wasn't a comedy, it wasn't a hood movie, and that's what black people like, right? So they discussed having the movie remade to appeal to black audience members and to cleanse it of its distinct qualities. Journalist Karen James wrote about the 1990 Sundance Film Festival and opened her piece with a description of the newfound attention Harris was receiving. She also wrote about how the movie could only be improved by a slicker remake. The story of an uneducated black man from Flint, Michigan, who masquerades as a doctor, a lawyer, and a Harvard student, Chameleon Street is the same fragmented, jittery, and apparently non-commercial work it always was. Only a slick remake could turn it into the Black Zelig, as some Italian journalists called it, when it was shown at the Venice Film Festival last fall. For remakes, they considered a more action-packed version, possibly starring Wesley Snipes, or a more comedic version starring either Arsenio Hall or Will Smith or Sinbad. Chameleon Street already had plenty of funny moments.
Let's go. No, let's just stay here. Why is this nurse breathing so hard? She's freaking me out. We got somebody new. He's gonna hire.
What, that white boy?
Rick.
Oh,
Rick. When you meet him, I hope you don't say, well, hello, white boy. Just say, hello, Rick.
But studios wondered, was it the right kind of humor for black audiences? Will Smith was aware of Chameleon Street. He'd seen the movie, and he was gung-ho for a remake. In fact, when the remake talks ceased, Smith, who liked the scene in Chameleon Street where Doug solves a Rubik's Cube to get a job as a surgeon so much, decided to recreate it not once, but twice. The first time in The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
In short, you're not Princeton material.
Then I guess my work here is done. Oh, but as a parting gift... Hey, yo.
And the second in The Pursuit of Happiness. These conversations about the remake, though, were just conversations. Nothing ever came of it. In the meantime, Harris tried to pitch other ideas, including one called Necropolis, a satirical epic set during ancient Rome, but no one would touch him or his project with a 10-foot pole. What makes this even more interesting is that during this time, the early 1990s, studios were clamoring to finance and distribute more black-led and black-created films. It was a time where there seemed to be more promise for black voices to be heard. 1989 saw the release of Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing, and the industry wanted more of that. Look at John Singleton as an example. He penned the script for his first film, Boys in the Hood, and insisted that he had to be the one to direct the project. His biggest fear, understandably, was that his vision would be botched by a white director and then mangled further by potential studio interference. He wanted what he created to be his, so he wouldn't sell the script without an agreement that he would get to direct it as well. It took no time at all for Columbia Pictures to buy the script, agree with Singleton's terms, and greenlight the project. It also helps that Boys in the Hood was just, at its core, a good fucking movie. Another example is the 1991 film Straight Outta Brooklyn, the first feature from young filmmaker Matty Rich. The story of how this movie came together is more interesting than the movie itself, and I understand why people wanted to root for it. Rich was only 19 when the movie came out. He brought all of this together as a young teen, and as a result, his coming-of-age story about a teenager looking for a way out of his poor background was more authentic than most stories centering on adolescence. He financed the project with credit cards and loans from his family. Seeing how he put the film together at such a young age, it was frankly inspiring, and it still is. But the movie itself is a little hard to get through. Characters are thin, dialogue is rough, and the dramatic moments are difficult to take seriously. But the film fit the mold of what studios wanted to see from Black filmmakers, so it had no problem getting distribution, where it managed to make $2 million on a shoestring budget. Similarly, Ernest Dickerson, director of the masterpiece that is Juice, had no problems getting his film financed or distributed. Juice and Boys in the Hood are great movies that have aged well. I don't want to take that away from them or minimize them as just hood movies because that's reductive as hell. But I do think it's hard to deny that in comparison to Chameleon Street, these movies fit into the box that the film industry was putting Black creatives in. They wanted to hear more Black stories, they did. But when those Black stories weren't about growing up in the hood or gang violence, they simply didn't know what to do with it, and had the gall to question whether it was Black enough.
I'm talking about gentrification. A Black Harlem shifting under a white hipster land grab. But your play never goes there. I ask myself, did a Black person really write this?
Years later, Harris would say he regretted staying in Hollywood so long, pitching this project and that to no avail. He wishes he had left sooner, but it was hard to believe that all these meetings and this major accolade would lead to nothing. Steven kept saying, "Don't worry, it'll come through. It's going to come through." This is in 1991. When a joke starts going around Hollywood that all you have to do to get a production deal is be a Black male director and not Wendell Harris, I finally got hip to what was happening. Shame on me spending 3 years trying to work with them. I should have moved back to Michigan, worked up my company, and gone on to the next film. But I could not believe you could win the grand jury prize and not get some kind of deal. Chameleon Street was a Black film. There's no doubt about it. Not only with its predominantly Black cast, but it had a Black director and a Black writer, and most of the money used to finance it came from Black people through crowdfunding and loans from Harris's family. But when it came time to distribute, Harris was told time and time again that it was impossible for the film to be released as it was because it wasn't quite Black enough. Where was the hood? Where was the gang violence? Where was the slang? This isn't a Black movie. They weren't quite sure what it was. The only option Warner Brothers saw was to take the movie and remake it so Black audiences could understand it. It's exceptionally rare, maybe even unheard of, for an American company to choose to remake an American film, so Warner Brothers' action said a lot. This Black film that didn't fit into the industry's limited idea of Blackness might as well have been a foreign film that needed to be translated. Warrington Hudlin, the producer of House Party, said this in a segment about Chameleon Street for ABC's 2020.
They don't think we're Americans. They think that our film is only, it's like we speak a different language or something, that only people who look like us come to our movies. Not so.
And film critic John Powers had this insightful take to add in the same segment.
To buy Chameleon Street for a remake actually maybe really says what the status of any kind of most serious Black films are, is they actually are films as if from a foreign country. That they aren't even conceived to be sort of American movies. They're conceived to be these kind of weird movies from afar that you can remake and make into American movies. Even though Chameleon Street's probably one of the very few movies that's been shot on the streets of Detroit in the last 20 years.
For a long time, Harris didn't recognize exactly what was going on with his film. He knew it was hard. He didn't understand why it was so hard, but the process was making him miserable. He, a man who, at age 12, had written out treatments for every movie he wanted to make before he turned 30, was feeling like he wanted to walk away from making movies altogether. He had done the thing everyone had said to do. He made a film that people liked. He financed it himself. He got it to a major festival. Why was it so hard to prove he was worthy of making films? That his film was worthy of being seen? It wasn't until that interview with Elvis Mitchell that Harris realized that his film was, indeed, being suppressed. Reflecting on the grueling experience, Harris described the moment he knew Mitchell had been right in his assessment, and stated, "If you make the money, you'll be promoted. If you don't make the money, you won't be. But, as Orson Welles said, there's something more important in Hollywood than money. What vision is being promoted? In other words, what are the ideas being promoted in the film? Ideas get demoted and suppressed. Money is not the final arbiter. Content is king. It is what's going to be given or fed to the American public and to the world. The ideas in Chameleon Street have always threatened the status quo. I was essentially paid $250,000 to, it almost feels like bribe money or hush money. I was told repeatedly by every distributor in Hollywood, it's a wonderful film, we just don't know what to do with it. But they knew exactly what to do with it. Suppress it. Alongside the industry's bafflement at the film, there was this undercurrent of disdain toward Harris on a personal level. It seemed he committed the most grave sin of all. He was competent, and this often got translated as uppity. John Pearson, a filmmaker and producer, published a book in 1995 where he gave readers an inside look on the independent scene in the world of film festivals, distribution, and the like. Around page 206, Pearson recalls Wendell B. Harris's win at the 1990 Sundance Film Festival. With jaws dropping all over the room, Chameleon Street won the grand jury prize, The Revenge of Steven Soderbergh. To Sleep with Anger was the runner-up. Jaws dropped further when Wendell arrived at the podium and his dark sunglasses and very white-like basso profundo voice boomed out in the most memorable Sundance incident of egomania run amok. Pearson shares a lot of details in this book, recounting specific conversations and even the way Spike Lee stumbled over his words during his first major radio interview, allegedly saying the word ideal when he meant idea. But Pearson offers nothing to expand on this claim that Harris's thank you speech was egomania run amok, and you're kind of left to wonder whether perception is doing more work than reality here. I'm reminded of the Hicks review from earlier. Harris has a commanding screen presence and a great voice, but he's too often smug and condescending. Perspectives such as this one are a fragment of why studios were so afraid of Chameleon Street. Here was this protagonist, a black protagonist, who had the gall to be unlikable, but also charming, but also condescending. He wasn't a hero, far from it, and the fact that he wasn't trying to be was strange. Cinema was no stranger to the unlikable and unreliable narrator. Plenty of films have focused on people who have committed acts of cruelty and ultraviolence, people who are pompous and calculated and condescending. But it was only a problem for some audiences when it came to seeing a black man acting in such a role. It reminds me of a quote from the Ivan Dixon classic, The Spook Who Sat by the Door.
Remember, a black man with a mop, tray, or broom in his hand can go damn near anywhere in this country, and a smiling black man is invisible.
The 1973 film, based on a book of the same name penned by Sam Greenlee, follows Dan Freeman, a man recruited by the CIA in an effort to find a token black employee to dispute claims against segregation.
First, how do we retrieve the lost black vote?
Gil, why don't we accuse the CIA of a racially discriminatory hiring policy? They have no Negroes.
Despite being set up for failure with impossible tests, Freeman completes his training and becomes an agent. After working with the CIA for 5 years, he decides to leave the organization and return home to Chicago so he can help the youth. On the surface, he's a social worker, but in reality, He is using what he's learned in the CIA and teaching young black men in his neighborhood the importance of black militancy and resistance. He teaches them how to make bombs, how to improve their shooting techniques, how to fight in hand-to-hand combat. The spook who sat by the door faced its own issues. Where Chameleon Street was never picked up for distribution, The Spook Who Sat by the Door was not only picked up, but it was pretty successful for the hot minute the public actually had access to it. But with no explanation or reason given, the film was pulled from theaters and it disappeared for 20 years. It was actor Tim Reed who sought the film out. Reed, who had grown up in a segregated community in Virginia, remembered watching The Spook Who Sat by the Door, and when he created his own studio, he knew he wanted to get his hands on the missing film and give it a DVD distribution. With meticulous effort and time, he tracked down a negative that was labeled under a completely different name. Now the film gets screened at local film festivals to celebrate black cinema, and in 2012, the Library of Congress added it to its National Film Registry. But for a time, this film was almost completely lost to history. The suppression of Chameleon Street and The Spook Who Sat by the Door called to mind the importance of looking back, of investigating history, both on and off screen, to know what was or what could have been, and to shed light on anything that got buried throughout the years. Not just looking back, but bridging the gap between history and present and future through acknowledgement of what came before. This is quite literally the theme and plot of Cheryl Dunier's The Watermelon Woman. Who gets lost in the past? Who gets forgotten? Awakening AM has a great essay about this film that I'll link here, but of course, if you haven't actually watched the movie first, do that and then watch your essay. And then watch more movies. And just keep going like that until you die. If I ever am fortunate enough to make a film of my own someday, I mean, who knows what's gonna happen? I'm gonna do it knowing I'm standing on the shoulders of Franza Woods, Zora Neale Hurston, Julie Dash, Suzanne Palsy, Kathleen Collins, Darnell Martin, Colleen Smith, Jessie Maple, Cheryl Dunier, Cassie Lemons, Rhoda Blank, and so many other black women in filmmaking whose names have not been put down in history books. In April of this year, Ryan Coogler's much-anticipated Southern Gothic horror film Sinners was released to widespread acclaim and commercial success. I cannot stress enough how much people are talking about this movie, how much they're enjoying it, and how it's brought people back to the theaters, which is something that is always worth celebrating. Somehow though, despite the success, a conversation started to circulate around Coogler and a game-changing deal he made with Warner Brothers. This deal would see the rights to his film going back to him after 25 years, giving him access to potential revenue through streaming and other merchandising. Naturally, people had a lot to say about this, and despite the amazing success the movie has been receiving, there have been plenty of naysayers ready to minimize its significance, up to and including that infamous Variety article that read like the wettest of blankets trying to smother the roof Sammy set ablaze. I don't need to tell you that the deal Coogler made is not unheard of, and it's not this deeply sinister thing his critics are making it out to be. It's amazing that an artist is getting ownership of his work, and it's amazing that an original work like this is a thing sending people to theaters en masse right now. Pause. You need to accept the fact that nothing is original, okay? Everything that is original or seems original is an amalgamation of things that came before it, delivered in a fresh way. I can already hear you typing out your, "Nuh-uh, Sinners is like Salem's Lot, is like From Dusk Till Dawn, is like The Thing, is like The Faculty, is like Idlewild." That's what happens when you're an artist who appreciates other art. There's no such thing as original, and when I say it's an original film, I just mean it's not bogged down by the weight of the cinematic universe, okay? Okay. When I saw the deal Coogler made with WB, I felt elated. And because I had Chameleon Street on my mind, I also felt like it was overdue. WB is a company that made the botched deal for Chameleon Street, buying the remake rights instead of the distribution rights. The company that saw a movie about a black man fooling people by becoming what they want for him to be and thought, "This works, but it should change for me because I want it to be different." That's the irony about that stupid deal, isn't it? By telling Harris they needed to change his story, they were repeating themes made clear in the movie, and by telling him that his movie wasn't a black film, spoke to their distortion of what qualifies as blackness. Director Bill Gunn, behind films like Ganja and Hess and Personal Problems, had his first film, Stop, absolutely destroyed by the studio that initially signed on to finance and distribute it. Yeah, that studio was also WB. Is it that we've gotten so used to studios screwing artists over that when they do something right, our instinct is to fight it? What does that say about our relationship to art or to artists? Eventually, Chameleon Street did get a release. It played in theaters in New York for 2 weeks. Then it didn't see the light of day for another 30 years. Around 2019, Arbiters Films reached out to Wendell B. Harris. They were interested in doing a 4K restoration of the film, and they were wondering if he'd be interested. This was the first time Harris had heard from anyone even remotely close to the film industry in years, and he was hesitant at first. They were talking about how his project was an art house film, which he knew translated to very little profit and potentially less exposure. And just the idea of getting into any distribution deals again was enough to make him shudder. When interviewed by A.E. Hunt for Filmmaker magazine, Harris said, "At the moment, Arbiters Films is handling the 4K restoration of Chameleon Street, and I am certainly impressed with the job they're doing. But I can definitely tell you that the 30 years I spent prior to the 4K restoration had been absolute hell. You break your back to get the budget. You break the back of everybody who worked in the film's hopes and dreams to actually get it made. And then when you get it made, the next step for it is to be seen by as many people as possible. I can honestly say that 99% of Chameleon Street is exactly the way I want it to be. I can also say 99% of its distribution has not been the way I wanted it to be at all." With Harris's blessing, Arbiters handled the 4K restoration and redistribution. They designed 2 different posters, one that's become the image accompanying the film on streaming service, and another used for the very cool Blu-ray design. Harris gave a shout out to Arbiters and publicist Emma Myers, saying at the time that they had done more for Chameleon Street in the last month than anyone had in 30 years. Today, the film is available on Blu-ray and streaming services like Tubi, which is home to a lot of gems y'all just don't know, and Peacock. More people have access to Chameleon Street today than ever before, so please watch it, buy the Blu-ray, and hell, if you happen to own a theater or you like to organize film festivals or something, dedicate a screen to Chameleon Street one of these days. My friends make fun of me because I've moved around a lot throughout my adolescence and adulthood, and whenever I move, I get rid of a lot of things. Dishes are given away, furniture is donated, even some clothes are handed down. But the one consistent thing that I take with me no matter where I go are 3 large boxes. One that holds my small personal library of books, and the other 2 that hold the DVDs and Blu-rays I've accumulated since I was 9 years old. Even when I was in high school, and my friends would tease me about still buying DVDs, I couldn't see the logic in parting with my movies. And in the years since then, we've learned the truth about owning things digitally. When we purchase something digitally, we buy access to it, access that can be revoked at any time. I think holding on to those DVDs, even when everyone told me I didn't need them anymore, was the wisest thing a dumbass like me could have done. Films and books and art in general, it's just so precious. And if we've learned anything from Chameleon Street or The Spook Who Sat by the Door or the systemic erasure of history by the government that we're currently witnessing, it's that it is very easy for things to be erased and to be forgotten. It's our job to hold on to what was and to carry it to new generations. I can't imagine what would have happened to The Spook Who Sat by the Door if Ivan Dixon hadn't had the insight to save a negative of the film under a different name. He knew what the film represented. He knew it could be easily suppressed. His actions saved it from being buried, and now it's our job to ensure that his films, and others like it, can stay above ground. When Harris looks back on the film and the grueling years he spent in Hollywood, he says the only thing that made it better, that made him feel supported, were the countless film festivals and local theaters and film critics and writers who continued to put Chameleon Street in front of an audience. The ball, if not burden, of Chameleon Street has been carried for 3 decades by film critics and film festivals. I include small local cinemas and art house theaters under the aegis of film festival. There isn't enough time and space for me to accurately describe to you now what these last 30 years have been like vis-a-vis Chameleon Street. Suffice it to say, this renaissance you say it's experiencing at the moment would not be taking place if not for all those film critics and film festivals. I love them the way a drowning man loves the person who pulls him out of the water.